Hello guys. Welcome back to another uh, slide for building Node.js application. In our last slide, we had added the two new routes, and right now I've started the application. It's running on port 3001. So for your case, go ahead and open a new terminal, and then just run npm start. Let's see. So once you type npm start, you're gonna see app is running on port 3000. So let's go to the browser and make sure uh, uh, that the application is working. So as you can see, if you visit the home page, it's gonna say welcome to Node.js. So let's double check on the two new routes. You see the users route is working. It says here is a list of users, and then if you go to add user route, the same, it's working correctly. So uh, uh, the, the two new routes are working fine. So let's go back to the VS Code real quick. So right now, what I want to focus on this slide is the MVC pattern. So if you go to Google real quick, and then search for MVC architecture, you're gonna see this is a pattern that separates an application into three main logical components. So let's click on there. So the components include the model, the view, and the controller. So the model corresponds to all the data related logic that the user works with. So so this is mainly for use for creating like the maybe it's the user model. For a user, let's say we registering a person, or maybe a group of people. So for each person is going to have maybe a first name, last name, age, maybe phone number. So that's like the model, like the details about the user. So for the view, it consists of the UI. So for like for this page right here, we are in the tutorialspot.com. So this is the UI. So the view is gonna present all the data in the correct format for the user to be able to see it from the front of the website. So for the controller, this is a part which connects the model and the view. And the main job for the controller is to process data and manipulate data. For example, maybe fetching a list of users and then presenting it to the view in the correct format. So, so if we go back to our VS Code real quick. So right now to implement that, let's go ahead and create a new folder in there, and we can name this folder controller. And then we also need we also need a new folder, and we can name it the views folder. So we're gonna add the model folder, and actually the view right now we're not gonna be using, but we can just leave it there. So we need another. So we need another folder for the model. So we need another notes. So for this slide, I'm gonna focus on the controller and the routes because what I'm trying to implement is I'm trying to separate. It's normally in programming it's called separation of concern. So this part right here is the function which process like the business logic. Whenever a user visits the website, there's a get request for the slash users. This function right here is the one that is going to be executed. So we can move this inside the controller and give it a name. That way, this path right here, we can also move it into the route folder, and then that way, when the user goes to slash users, this action is going to be called from the controller. So let's go ahead and create a file inside the controller, and we can name it something like since we are talking about a list of users and the application is going to be a user management system, we can just name the controller user controller .js like so, and then for the let's go back to the app real quick. So we're gonna grab this part right here, just the function, and then you can cut it and then go back to the user controller. In there we're gonna create a new function, and because this action is the one for fetching a list of users, we can use the name like maybe something like get users. Okay, so whenever you are naming like your variables, it's good to use something that relates to what the function is all about. So for our case, I think there's an error right here, so it's supposed there should be an S right there. So for this function, its main job is to send a list of users to the view. So that's why you see I use get users right there. So the other part that we need to do is we need to add another file inside the routes, and for this one we can use a name something like user routes .js like that. And then now we already moved the function into this controller, and then now we need to work on this other section right here, the path. So we can maybe we can cut that right there and then go back to the user route, because Express is the one responsible for the routing in this application. We're gonna need to reach out and require Express again. So we can say const Express equals to require, and then what are we requiring? It's the Express. The reason why we're doing this is because we need now to use a Express router, and to do that, come underneath there and say const router equals to Express, and then reach out to the router, which is right, this one right here, and then just call it like that. Okay, so if you go back to the app.js, you can see we were using the app.use. So and what this part for the user was doing, it was fetching a list of users. So for this, so get, normally fetching is a get request. It's an HTTP get request. So right here in the router, we'll come and type router, and then for this, if it's something fetching, if the user is trying to fetch maybe data from the database, we're going to be using the get request. If it's maybe adding a new user to the database, we're going to be using the post. And then if it's deleting, we're gonna use the delete. And if it's maybe update something, we can use put. I believe there's also the patch right there. Okay, so so for this route, we using the get request, and the path that we would like to listen to is this one for the slash users. Next, right now we have the user controller ready. As you can see, it's ready, and we've named it get users. So when a user goes to this part, we're gonna call that action in the controller, which is get users. And to do that, we need to import the user controller into this file. So go ahead and use const user controller. Now this is going to import the whole file into this application. So I mean into this routes folder under the user routes.js. So go ahead and require. You can use the require right there, and then Since it's inside another folder, you're gonna use the two dots and then the slash, and then select the controller and then the user controller. Okay, so and then to use this controller, we're gonna come inside the router and then just type user controller like that, and then dot the name of the action. So our action is name get users, and for this, because it's a function, we're not supposed to execute right here. Express is going to take care of that. So by just writing get users, when a user goes to this slash users, the action inside the controller, which is named get users, is going to execute. And if you click on this function, as you can see, it's supposed to return a message which says here is a list of users. So now we need to export this file into the app.js. As you can see, there's an error because we've removed the path and this function right here. So we need to export this route, and to do that, just type module dot exports, and then the name. We can name it router like that. So if we go back to app.js, and then up here we can go ahead and say go ahead and import the route. So you can say cons user routes equals to requirement, and because we are in the root in part of the folder, we're just gonna use a one dot to get inside the routes and then access the user routes.js. So as you can see, just one dot and then the slash, and then we go into the routes, then slash user routes like that. So now in here we're gonna go in and just say app.use user routes like that. So I think this user route should be working now correctly like before. So because we have the action ready and the route for this request ready. So if you go back to the browser and then go ahead and let's go back to the home page. So you see the home page is working correctly. Now let's do a slash and then go to the users. Give it a second for it to load. You see it says here is a list of users. So our application is working correctly. So we need to go again to the VS Code, and then inside the app.js, you see we have another route for slash add dash user. So we need to replicate the same, just like we did the one for slash users. So to do that, let's go ahead again, and for this slash add user, we're gonna start with the routes. Remember, in the first one we had started with the user controller. So let's this time around let's do that by starting with the route. So go ahead and say router, because it's going to be a get, because this route right here, this route for slash add user is a get request. We're going to use router dot get, because get is for handling requests, like incoming requests, like for fetching items in the database. So for this one, the route is slash add user, but because this route is going to be for adding a user to the database, we're gonna have also a post route, because we need to use a get route. That way we're able to maybe present a form for adding the user in the view. That way when the user fills in the form and clicks submit, we're gonna have another router.post. Now this post request is going to be getting that data from the body. In our case, it's data from the inputs. and then uh, manipulating the data to make sure, maybe like doing maybe some validation, just to make sure the data that we are trying to save to the database is in the correct format. So later on, we're gonna use the post instead of, we're gonna add another router that post route. So for this right now, because we're not adding any user right now to the database, we're just gonna use the get. So remember, the next part after the path is reaching out to the controller and turn into the action that is gonna be called when the user goes to this endpoint. So if we go back to the app.js, you can see now we've covered this part right here. So we can go ahead and delete that. The next part is this one right here, the action. So the action is responsible for sending the message add new user. So we can go ahead and cut and actually remove the other part right here. So if we go back to the routes, actually let's go back to the controller and then create another action. So for this one, we can use exports dot get add user, because this is the page which will present something like a form for a user to, for maybe an admin to add a user into the database. So for this one, we're going to use an equals, and then we can paste the function that we just cut from the app.js. So you can see that this action is called get add user, and its main job right now is to send a message to the front saying add new user. So if you go back to the app.js, actually we go back to the routes now, because now we have the path already. So the other section is the controller. So we're gonna use again the user controller and then dot. Now we're not gonna be using the get users. For this one we can use the get add user. So just select that one. Now when a user goes to slash add dash user, this action inside our controller is going to be executed. So if you click in there, you can see there's a message that will be printed out saying add new user. So I think everything else should be working fine now. So let's go back to the browser real quick and then go to add user and wait for it to load. As you can see, the new message in there is add new user. So our application is working correctly. So with a few lines of code and the two newly added folders, the controllers and the routes, we have managed to separate the concerns, and in our case is by separating the business logic into the controllers, and then the routes folder right here is the one that will handle all the requests for the users and for the add user. So our application is getting leaner and leaner. So the app.js it's not like the way it was before, because as the application grows, you're gonna be adding new routes and new actions also, like for maybe adding users, for deleting. Maybe down the line you need to maybe scale up your application. So it's always good to have this approach in your application where it's called the MVC. So as we continue, I know you guys remember we had the model folder and the views folder. So we haven't touched on these two folders yet, but we're gonna start working on that in our next slide. So for the model, like I mentioned, this is gonna be used for creating maybe a user model. So once we start connecting the application to the database, same case with the views. This is we're gonna use there's a template called EJS. So this template is used to like maybe present data to the front of the website. So in our next slide, we're gonna start focusing on the two folders, the views folder and the model. So let's keep watching.